And now we're going to live broadcast.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Mike Doyle with Dr. Diane Trautman. We'll be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for joining us today on our second virtual Harris County Democratic Lawyer webcast luncheon. We're planning at this point another opportunity in June. We've had really great attendance. As a matter of fact, we have over 450 folks that are joining us for today's webinar, in large part not just because of the speakers, but also incredibly how important this issue is going to be going forward for all Texans, Texas Democrats, and Texas citizens. There's a couple announcements I'd like to share with you. First, I want to welcome all those members of the brand new Texas Democratic Lawyers Association and affiliates, which is due in no small part rather to the hard work of our founding President Lee Aurelano, Barbara Adnowski, our current Vice President Steve Duble, Rose Clouston, and Carol Robinson and Chad Dunn. It's particularly appropriate because we all know that in this election year, as in any other, but maybe even more so, voter protection is what's going to be the key to making sure that people's voice is heard. And having these affiliates across the state, as we've had in Harris County for the last 14 years, is going to be a critical part of it. There's also going to be another free Harris County Democratic Lawyer CLE with an internationally recognized speaker, Dr. Brendan Kelly from Trinity Dublin University, speaking on how to cope with coronavirus. He's published an online book, and that'll be on May 21st. Finally, there's an opportunity that I would absolutely encourage not just our members, but our non-members, and that's to participate in this upcoming runoff and for the election as election judges and clerk. Our member, Nicole Peterson, is coordinating that with the association as well as the Harris County Democratic Party. If you're available, please reach out to Nicole at vopro, V-O-P-R-O, at harrisdemocrats.com. Once again, that's Nicole at vopro at harrisdemocrats.com. I'll go ahead and put that out on the chat as well so that you can have that for access. And along those lines, the way it's going to work today as it's worked in our previous webinar and probably the ones you participated, we're going to use the chat function. Dr. Trautman won't be able to stay until the very end, but there will be Doug Ray as well as Roxanne Werner from her office to answer questions. But if you have questions as it proceeds, please go ahead and add those to the chat function. You can either send it directly to me privately, or you can send it to everyone, and we'll answer those at the last 10 to 15 minutes of the presentation. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Diane Trautman, who many of y'all know has an incredible responsibility as the chief voting official in the third largest county in the United States, Harris County. Dr. Trautman comes from the field of education, although I also learned that she started at First City Bank, which back when you started at Vincent Elkins a long time ago, you were more or less required to get an account at First City. She has a doctorate from Sam Houston State in educational leadership, started on the front lines of teaching and working as a principal, has degrees from both Stephen F., U of H, and Sam Houston. In doing her job under these trying times, she's one that deservedly has the background and experience to be able to do that. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Trautman. Thank you, Dr. Trautman.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks so much for having me too. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our preparations for the upcoming July and November elections. To start with, these are trying times, no doubt. But, I'm impressed and inspired every day by how people everywhere are rising to the occasion to make this work. And impressed and inspired every day by my staff, who has risen to the occasion to make sure that we have a safe, secure, and compliant election in July and November. So what have we been doing the last 6 weeks while we've been out of our office? We have been holding a lot of virtual meetings, collaborating with a variety of groups, community groups, voting rights groups. We've been talking to the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, the Bipartisan Policy Center, The Brennan Center for Justice, we have a call with every couple of weeks as well. The Harris County Attorney's Office, Rice University, we have been dealing with Dr. Bob Stein, who has been developing a survey for voters and poll workers to get their views on what type of election setup would be best. We have also met with both political parties, preparing them for the different requirements for the upcoming primary runoff as well as November. And we've joined a 20-county coalition that meets every other week with the Secretary of State. In fact, we just got off that call this morning. So we're getting a bird's eye view of what other counties are experiencing and sharing best practices with them. So from all of this collaboration, what we have determined is that an expanded mail ballot program, in addition to a safe and secure in-person voting process, is going to be the best fit for Harris County. Now, when I say expanded mail ballot program, I simply mean that this allows us to be ready to process more mail ballots for July and November. And in fact, we're already seeing an uptick in requests for mail ballot applications. So we need to be prepared. Safe and secure in-person voting process, of course, is also necessary. In a county this large, we will have people, no matter what, who want to vote in person, and we have to be ready for that as well. So we did receive an allocation of $12 million from Commissioner Court to fund this expanded mail ballot program. But what I would call this 12 million, the majority of this 12 million allocation is an insurance policy. It's an insurance policy to prepare for a large increase in mail ballots. And as I said, we are already experiencing and seeing some of that already with the increase in mail ballot applications. So the majority of that 12 million is like that insurance policy, but about 1.4 million will be allocated for the July election to purchase PPE, the personal protective equipment for poll workers and locations, for high volume scanning equipment and sorting equipment, for additional postage and ballot cost, and for a robust voter outreach program to inform people who are eligible that they can apply by mail. Because Texas, as many of you know, is not really a vote by mail state. Only about 6% in Harris County take advantage of voting by mail. So it will require some additional voter outreach. A few dates to look at there for the July runoff would be the last day to register to vote, June 15th. The last day to apply for ballot by mail is July 2nd. Early voting will be July 6th through the 10th. That's a Monday through Friday, no weekends. And election day is July 14th. Looking ahead to November, we are, as I said, preparing for an increase in mail ballots, and especially for 65 or over. So our message to them is, if you are 65 or over, you do qualify, and you should go ahead and get your application in the mail if you do not have it already, because the last thing we want to see are senior citizens waiting in long lines. And I have to tell you, the lines are going to be long. They're going to appear long simply because we have to do social distancing, spacing out the voters every 6 feet. So a line of 25 will look like 50. A line of 100 will look like 200. That is why we are urging people to either vote early or vote by mail if they qualify. We are also forming a working group composed of representatives from our Harris County Health Department, Metro, Food Bank, the school districts, city and county representatives to address recruiting more poll workers and finding larger polling locations. And again, we need those larger polling locations to space people out. So we're looking for schools that have gymnasiums, large warehouse type situations like the food bank, to see if we can find those. And we feel like these stakeholders would help us do that. Also, as Mike said earlier, if any of you are interested in volunteering to be a poll worker, we would welcome you. And so, yes, get with Nicole, or you can also get with Roxanne Werder, my community relations director. She would be happy to sign you up, and so would I. We are also ordering the necessary PPE for poll workers, and that's going to include face shields, not just the mask, but the face shield that would completely, the plastic see-through that would completely cover the face, gloves, hand sanitizer, and disinfectant to disinfect the equipment and the countertops where voters come. We are also providing virtual training at home for poll workers. We are also preparing for that robust voter outreach program, asking voters to vote early, vote by mail if eligible, and return their mail ballot as soon as possible. And why is that important? Well, we don't want a last minute deluge of ballots to come to our office the day before or the day of the election. That would be extremely difficult to process. So we're really urging people as soon as they get their ballot, if they're voting by mail, to return it as soon as possible. We are also acquiring additional voting machines and equipment from other counties that have gone on to use another manufactured voting machine. So we can obtain the older E-Slate equipment from them at a very reasonable price, and in some cases for free. So that's what we're doing for that. I would also like to point out the dates for the November election. The deadlines to register to vote is October 5th. The last day to apply for a ballot by mail is October 23rd. The early voting period is October 19th through 30th, and election day is November 3rd. Now, any other information you might want about the upcoming elections can always be found at our website, harrisvotes.com. We also have an FAQ section on our voting by mail if you have more questions about that as well. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Doug Ray from our County Attorney's Office. Mike, I thank you again for having me. And again, please, if any of you are interested in being a poll worker, please let us know. We would love to have you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trautman. And we've got some questions that Doug and the folks that participating will be able to answer at the end. And thank you for putting this in your schedule.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Now we're going to hear from Doug Ray, who's with the County Attorney's Office. He's the fella that is tasked with figuring out, given the proper advice, making the proper legal advice for Harris County on not just voting in general, but in particular this voting by mail issue that we're facing now in Harris County, given the pandemic. Doug started with the Attorney General's office, worked in the condemnation section, and as he mentioned earlier when we were visiting, he had the responsibility for many of the freeways around the Houston area, which is kind of a mixed blessing, I guess, when he was doing eminent domain. Please join me in welcoming Doug Ray.
All right. I don't see myself on the video, but I am Douglas Ray. I'm with the Harris County Attorney's Office, and I have been there for about 17 years now, and about 13 of that has been spent actually participating in advising the county clerk's office and the tax assessor, collector, voter registrar's office about election law. The ballot by mail has become a very serious issue this last election because of the heightened interest in using it instead of the traditional voting in person. Let me just go through kind of the nuts and bolts of ballot by mail so that everybody will understand how it works. The first thing that you have to do is that not everybody is eligible to actually vote by ballot by mail. you have to fit one of the criterias that the law specifies. There is a provision under federal law that allows for what's known as a federal postcard request for a ballot by mail. If you're in the military and stationed overseas, you can send one of these requests in. There are 4 categories under state law that allow you to have a ballot by mail. The first one is that if you're going to be out of the county during the election period. The second one is if you're 65 or over. The next one is if you're sick or disabled. Actually, the section just says disabled at the top of it as far as a qualification for voting. And the last one is if you're incarcerated in jail. So if you fit one of those categories, you can ask for a ballot by mail. The process is that you have to send in a written request. The written request has to, have your name, your address. If you're asking that it be sent to another address because you're going to be out of the county, or if you're in jail, you have to specify the address of the jail or the place you're going to be out of the county. But your address has to be the address that you're registered at, and it has to have an original signature. You can actually not use an electronic signature on this document. You actually have to have a wet signature, have that sent into the clerk's office. The period of time that you can request a ballot by mail is you can request a ballot for any election during the year in which the election takes place. So starting January 1st, you can ask for a ballot by mail for any election that takes place that year. If you're over the age of 65 or if you're disabled, you can actually do what's known as an annual request. You can ask that all elections during the coming year that we send you a ballot by mail during that period of time. And you have to make that every year. So next year, you'd have to put in a new request. The second thing is that you have to fill out the form, but you don't have to use the form that we prepared. You don't have to use the official state form. But you have to send it in writing and have all those components in it that I just described. Now, the official state form is available on the county clerk's webpage under the vote by mail provision on harrisvotes.com. So if you go to harrisvotes.com, hit the tab on ballot by mail, you'll see a link from which you can download and print that form. And you fill it out, sign it, and send it in. The form actually has all the categories that you'd be eligible to vote already on there, so you just check one of them and fill out the rest of the information and send it in. Once we receive a ballot by mail request, the county clerk's office has to send you a ballot once they're available within 7 days. So if you send one in for the runoff in July, they have to send you a ballot by mail within 7 days after the ballot is finalized. Obviously, people that are entitled to a postcard, federal postcard ballot by mail that are overseas, we have to send those out 45 days before Election Day, which as far as I can tell is somewhere around May the 31st. So our ballot will be prepared and ready to mail out at least by that day. So once you've sent in your request, if there's some defect in it, it can be rejected, but we have to give you notice of the rejection. We have to send you notice and give you an opportunity to give a new ballot by mail request. What we do when we get these requests is we check to see that you're actually a registered voter, that the addresses match, and we send you a ballot if you check one of the qualifications and we determine that you are qualified. Now, we don't go behind the clerk doesn't go behind the representation that you make on there that you're disabled or you're going to be out of the county or that you're incarcerated. They accept that at face value. We have neither the staff nor the legal authorization to do an investigation to see if you're properly asserting those bases for getting a ballot by mail. So the big thing, and I'll come back to this in a minute, is can you claim that you're disabled? And will you have to designate why you think you're disabled? And will we investigate as to why you were disabled? And the answer to all those is no. We don't require you to specify why you're disabled. We don't require you to submit any proof that you're disabled. We don't do any investigation as to whether your claim of disability is correct. Now, law enforcement may claim that you're committing fraud at a later time, and they may investigate, but the county clerk's office does not. We'll send you the ballot. Once the ballot is sent, then it's up to you to fill it out and return it to the county clerk's office. It must be received by the day after election day, and it must be postmarked by election day in order to be a valid ballot by mail. And that also must be filled out and signed by the voter with an original signature. Now, one question that comes up is, can I have somebody help me fill out my request, or can I have somebody help me fill out my ballot by mail? The answer is yes. However, if a person aids you in filling out your request, they must sign, put their name and sign an original signature that they are the person rendering the assistance. A person is not allowed to render assistance to more than one person unless that person is a member of that the voter's family. And in addition, when a person aids in or assists in the filling out of the ballot by mail itself, you can also get anybody to assist you except your boss or your union rep. And that person can assist more than one person, but he can't be paid to render assistance. And an exception would be if it's a member of your own family. Once the ballot by mail is received by you, you have to give an original signature. And just to give you some insight into how this is processed, when the request is sent in to the clerk's office, they make a digital copy of the signature that's on that page. And when you send in your ballot by mail, that also has a digital copy that's made. And the early voting ballot board, which is the board that actually considers the ballot by mail and also the provisional ballots, they review it to see if the signatures match. And the way this is done ordinarily is that the two signatures are put digitally side by side on a computer screen, and one member of the Republican Party and one member of the Democratic Party reviews the signature and determines whether or not those are genuinely the same signature. If there's some disagreement, then the chairman of the early voting ballot board, the presiding judge of the early voting ballot board, comes and makes a determination as to whether to accept the vote or not. If it's rejected, then it has to be, a notice has to be sent to the voter as the reason why it's rejected. If you send in a ballot by mail and there's some defect to it, they have to send it back to you and give you an opportunity to get in a new ballot by mail if there's enough time to do so. So there's all these checks and balances to make sure that the person requesting the ballot is a registered voter, that he actually qualifies by claiming one of the bases for getting a ballot by mail, that his signature is matched to the signature that's on the ballot that's sent in by the voter, and that they can count it after that determination is made. So the question that's really come up lately has to do with what the definition of disability means. That is really the one thing that has caused all the controversy that everybody's heard about. Disability under the statute is that if a qualified voter has a sickness or physical condition that prevents the voter from appearing at the polling place on election day without a likelihood of needing personal assistance or injuring the voter's health, then that qualifies as disability. I read that to mean that if you're sick or your physical condition may require assistance or may injure you by appearing in person, that you qualify as eligible to get a ballot by mail. Let's parse that for just a little bit, because the Attorney General has also rendered an opinion about what that means. The Attorney General says that if you have a sickness or a physical condition, which he defines as being a sickness, that you're qualified to get a ballot by mail. And if you don't have a sickness, then you don't qualify. And however, I kind of take a different look at this. The legislature did not use the word sickness just for the heck of it. sickness and physical condition must mean two different things, or else they wouldn't have included both of those phrases or words in the statute. So when we come to defining physical condition, I think it means something different than sickness. And if you go to the dictionary that the Attorney General has cited for his definition of physical condition, you'll see what I mean. The Attorney General says that the definition of physical condition means an illness or a medical problem. That is one of the examples of the use of the word condition that's in the dictionary. However, the definition is the state of something with regard to its appearance, quality, or working order. And one of the other examples is a person or animal's state of health or physical condition. My opinion is that physical condition could be excellent. It could be good. It could be poor. For example, you could say Michael Phillips, his physical condition is really excellent. He's like the best swimmer in the world. So if you have a physical condition, which might be injured by appearing in person, you would qualify under this definition of disability. Physical condition must not mean the same thing as sickness. Otherwise, the word sickness would not have been included. Now, it would have been very simple for the legislature to define disability a different way. It could have said disability as defined in the Americans with Disabilities Act. It could have defined it according to what disability means in the Social Security Act. It could have defined it a lot of different ways, but it didn't do that. It just used these words, sickness or physical condition. So, does this mean that anybody who is healthy, who thinks that they might be injuring their health by appearing in person and exposing themselves to a deadly virus, would fit this description? I would say yes, that's exactly what it means. And that's what it means on the very face and the simple reading of disability. Now, I think that a lot of the law backs this up, including the law that the Attorney General cites, the Supreme Court cases. But in particular, I think what backs me up is what the Code Construction Act says. That's Chapter 311 of the Government Code. And what it says is that you're supposed to presume that it complies with the Constitution, that the entire statute is intended to be effective, and that a just and reasonable result is intended. Well, if the entire statute is intended to be effective, then using the words sickness and physical condition both means that both of them have to be given effect, not just one. And you can't say that the other phrase means the same thing as the first phrase. So I think that that actually backs up our interpretation. Now, we have been involved in litigation. The Democratic Party originally filed a case in the district court in Travis County and asked the court to enter an injunction to prevent the county clerk there from rejecting requests for mail-in ballots on the basis of disability, under the interpretation that sickness or physical condition did not include assertions that the COVID virus might injure the voter. And the court looked at the same statute I just reviewed. The court decided that a reasonable interpretation of that statute was that a healthy individual who may expose himself to the COVID virus by appearing in person was a person that fits the definition of disabled, which allows a voter to ask for a mail-in ballot and enjoin the clerk from, or any election official for that matter, from rejecting a ballot on the basis of claiming that disability definition. So that once that was entered, the state, which intervened in the case, they appealed it. And under the rules of appellate procedures, my understanding that the appeal automatically stays to the lower court. But in the meantime, not only the Harris County clerk, but several election officials around the state have basically adopted the reasoning used by the court and the definition of disabled that I just described. And they're doing so based on my advice as well. There are other cases that have been filed in federal court down in San Antonio in the Western District. Those federal cases are more expansive. They basically claim that to interpret the laws as to exclude people under the age of 65 from being able to use the ballot by mail circumstances under these conditions where COVID infection is a possibility, that these folks are being discriminated against under the Constitution and under the Voting Rights Act. So I believe there's a hearing set for next Friday, the 15th, in federal court to decide whether an injunction should be imposed against the state from preventing people from using the ballot by mail system. So to review, if you're over the age of 65, if you're disabled, if you're going to be out of the county, or if you're in jail, you can request a ballot by mail. You don't have to describe to us what your disability is or the reason why you're going to be out of the county, for example. You can just check disabled without any further evidence, proof of why you're disabled whatsoever. And we will not go behind that and require any proof or check to see what your disability is. That being said, I guess I have reached the end of my remarks and would like the moderator to take back over.
Well, thank you, Doug, and you did perfect timing. Congratulations. We now have an opportunity to hear from the Texas Democratic Party's voter protection chair or position, Rose Clouston. She's a graduate both of Florida and Georgetown, which is pretty unusual. I also know that she was in charge of online training nationally for Democratic candidates. So we have incredibly high expectations for her presentation. Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. I hope that I can deliver on the high bar that you're setting for me. So I'm so thrilled to be with all of you here today. And sorry, I just want to make sure I share my screen here before I get started. Great. So I'm so thrilled to be with all of you here today and heartened to see just the hundreds of folks who are so interested and committed to our little d democratic process, even amid this crisis. A special welcome to those of you who are joining from outside Harris County through the brand new Texas Democratic Lawyers Association. I am so excited for this organization to be launching. And it's not how the founders imagined because of this crisis, but like everything, we're all making the most of the opportunities we have and are so appreciative of the Harris County Democratic Lawyers Association's leadership and for paving the way and helping us launch this in this environment. So thank you all so much. We greatly appreciate it. As Mike said, I am the Voter Protection Director with the Texas Democratic Party, and I've been with the party since January, so got to live through the primary and tell the tale, and excited to use that experience to benefit voters and help everyone vote in the upcoming elections this year. So we've heard from our other panelists about how Harris County is approaching this crisis and making strides to adapt the elections here. But I want to start by zooming out a little bit and talking about the national stage. As you watch and read the news, you probably see what other states are doing, unless that might be just my microcosm of election administration Twitter. But you're seeing what other states are doing and how they're adapting. So I want to start by grounding us in those efforts and the standards that are being set nationally by Mark Elias, the DNC's lawyer and voting rights expert, by Stacey Abrams, the voting rights leader and Georgia gubernatorial candidate from 2018, and from election officials across the political spectrum themselves. And then we'll talk about how Texas stacks up and how we're meeting or not rising to those challenges of the national movement. Talk a little bit about vote by mail to pick up on what Doug said, and what the TDP is doing to adapt and support elections, and then what you can do. So what's been going on nationally? Well, when this crisis struck, we saw that a number of states were really looking to move toward voting by mail, and they did this in different ways. But one thing that I want to flag is that you're hearing a narrative here in Texas that this is a partisan issue. That's flat out wrong. All across the country, election administrators in states have been moving toward vote by mail across the political spectrum. You've seen Maryland, New Jersey, and Nevada mail all of their registered voters' ballots. Maryland has a Republican governor. You've seen all voters mailed a mail ballot application in Georgia and Idaho. Georgia is not known as a paragon of like a high standard setter for voting rights, and they're sending all of their voters a vote by mail application. So this is not a partisan issue. This is about ensuring that all eligible voters can cast a ballot in our elections. And in a crisis like this, voting by mail is a really important tool in that toolbox. Other areas that we've been seeing nationally is looking to have postage paid on the ballot and the application to make sure that no voter is impeded by lack of access to a stamp, either financial access or physical access, and that ballots postmarked by election day should be counted. But in addition to voting by mail, it is really important that we maintain the opportunity for folks to vote in person, because we have a lot of voters, whether it be because of challenges with the postal service or with mail, or because of language access needs or disability access needs, where they need to vote in person in order to cast a private and independent ballot. We need to retain in-person voting opportunities. And so some ways that states around the country are doing that are to expand curbside voting, where someone can stay in their car and cast their ballot from there. There's also a huge focus on polling place staffing. You heard Dr. Trautman talk about it, and Mike make a plug at the beginning. Our election workers in 2016 across the country, more than half of them were over the age of 60 and are in particularly high risk groups. We've heard from a lot of folks that they don't feel able to serve in upcoming elections. So we really need to make sure that as many of us as feel comfortable and are able are moving forward and putting ourselves forward to serve in those roles as election workers. And then also, as Dr. Trautman talked about, PPE and sanitation at polling places and being really mindful of that. There's a move toward county-wide voting. So I grew up in Chicago, and from one end of the city to the other is 2 hours long without any traffic. So if I was staying with my parents maybe during this crisis, it would be a real challenge to get back to where I was registered to vote. So things like that to make sure that we're accommodating how folks are navigating this crisis, and making sure they can vote where they're staying or where they are in their county. And then early voting should include weekend hours. So how does Texas stack up? How are we doing on these measures? Well, when we look at those national standards that are developing to support voters, Texas doesn't meet most of them on the vote by mail spectrum. As you heard Doug talk about, the first and foremost that all of these other things assume is that everyone who would like a mail ballot can access one. And that has been a huge hindrance here and in the conversation. That should really be the starting point for negotiations and for how we are adapting, not the gold standard that it seems like we're fighting for here. And so we are looking for opportunities for folks to vote by mail that are proving challenging. And Texas also does not pay for postage for the ballot or for the application. And so not really hitting all those marks on this one. So if you do submit your ballot postmarked by election day and it's received the next day, it will be counted. So there's one that we're doing okay on the vote by mail spectrum. And then what about in-person voting? Where do we stack up there? So we do offer curbside voting, though we do need to look to our county election officials and how they're going to make sure that that is available to all the voters who want to use it in this election. And I know that all of them are working incredibly hard on staffing our polling places and making sure that those election workers are safe and that we're not putting their health in danger by serving in this capacity, and that we really need that support on. And then the two that we do pretty well on are county-wide voting. Over 70 of Texas's counties do offer county-wide voting. So if you can vote at any polling place in your county on election day, though we do have over 150 counties that don't offer that. And in the general election, early voting will include weekend hours, though in our July primary runoff election, it will not. So let's talk a little bit more about the topic of the hour, voting by mail. I know Doug talked about this a little bit, so I'll be brief. But right after our March 3rd primary election, when the pandemic was spreading, the Texas Democratic Party knew that we needed to adapt our elections to ensure that Texans could have their voices heard in this democratic process without risking their health. No one should have to make that choice like voters in Wisconsin were forced to last month, between their health and having their voice heard in our democracy. So we tried to work with state officials, but they were unresponsive. And we know that our election officials need answers immediately in order to plan for and run an election that offers meaningful participation opportunities. So we are in court fighting for Texans' right to vote safely. And we had a hearing that Doug talked a little bit about in Travis County on April 15th. And then Judge Sulak issued an order that this is an excerpt from on April 17th, enjoining Travis County from rejecting any mail ballot applications received from registered voters who use the disability category of eligibility as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then our illustrious Attorney General had issued a tweet and a letter last Friday that contradicted that order and was intimidating folks from applying to vote by mail. We disagree with the Attorney General's interpretation, and we had filed yesterday to enforce that order and enforce the court order that you saw there. And we have response due on May 11th. The Attorney General is supposed to respond to that. And that case is moving through the appeals process and through these different enforcement processes. As Doug mentioned, we also have a federal court case in San Antonio, and a couple other folks have filed federal cases as well. And we're just trying to get the clarity for voters and for election officials that they need in order to move forward with this election, so that we don't have the tragic situation that we saw in Wisconsin. If you're interested in finding out more about those cases and following along, we keep all of the filings on a blog on our website, and you can access that at txdem.co/cases. All right, what else is the Texas Democratic Party doing to ensure our elections work well for voters? So we are working with county Democratic parties across the state to support our election officials and spread the best practices that we see folks in Harris County and around the state doing, so that we can make sure that counties across the state are aware of those, and who don't necessarily have the same resources or the same access that our bigger counties do, get that information and can share that with their voters as well. And then we are also going to be working with our county parties to support this election worker recruitment effort and the ballot boards that Doug talked a little bit about, how the ballots are counted, and making sure that those are all fully staffed so that all ballots are able to be counted, all valid ballots are able to be counted. And these are for the folks who are really the most important people on election day, these election workers, right? So we want to support them in going the extra mile for voters and making sure that all voters have a welcoming and comfortable opportunity to vote. And you'll see if you've signed up for this, you will get if you're not in Harris County. So I know in Harris County, there was an email address shared for you to sign up to be an election worker. If you're outside of Harris County, we'll be emailing you probably next week with some opportunities to sign up in your county. And how we're supporting voters directly. So if you want to stay up on the latest voter information about eligibility for a vote by mail ballot and opportunities to sign up for one, you can go to mytexasvotes.com, which is our voter education website, where we share all the important information that a voter needs to cast their ballot. We also have a hotline at 844-TX-VOTES for voters who have any questions about eligibility, deadlines, having a problem with their mail ballot, or get to the polling place and have an issue. We've got your back, and we're there to support voters in any step of the voting process. But we know that it's not just vote by mail that's a challenge in the pandemic. There's also registering to vote, where you also need that wet signature right now. And so we've created the website registertexas.com. Would encourage you to share this far and wide with your networks. If folks are not registered to vote at their current address, they can fill in the form online. We mail them their voter registration application filled out with the information they shared in an addressed stamped envelope. They just have to sign the application, pop it in the envelope we sent, and send it on its way to register to vote. Since Texas is, again, how we stack up, one of only a dozen states that doesn't allow our voters to register to vote online. So how you can help. I'm so thrilled that so many of you are interested in our voting process and what that's going to look like this year. And I'm looking forward to exploring all the ways you can help make this election work well and voters' experience be smooth throughout this election year. Both the HCDLA and the TDLA folks will be hearing much more about those opportunities as we move forward. But the first couple, as everyone has mentioned so far, is to serve as an election worker and to recruit other folks to do so. and keep up and amplify what's going on in the latest about these different trends and how folks can have their voices heard and participate in the process. And you can follow the Texas Democratic Party and myself on Twitter to keep up with the latest news. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to facilitate the questions.
Thanks, Rose. As expected, it was a great job. I appreciate it. We have a number of questions online, and if you haven't already put it in the chat function, we'll do our best, and at least from the number we have now, I think we'll be able to get them all answered. First one is from Councilwoman Abby came and asking about what happens if someone applies to process the mail ballots and a court strikes down or the Judge Sulak's order is struck down. What'll happen to those folks if they're already in the process, so to speak, if they're not waiting on a ballot and need to actually show up in person? And I'll direct that, I guess, Doug Ray, that may be something for you.
Well, the thing is that we are not going to try to put, disability applications in one pile and all the rest of the applications in the other pile. If on the face of it, you qualify for a mail-in ballot, you made an application, you check disability, we'll go ahead and process that ballot. I guess that the main value of the court action, if there's a definitive decision made by an appellate court, for example, if it defines somebody as being a disability that they don't have a disability, if they are merely not wanting to appear to avoid an infection by COVID, I think that the voter, it would be incumbent upon them to either return the ballot by mail or at least not cast it, so that that would be their personal responsibility to do. I don't know that any such definitive answer is actually going to be rendered before November. I'd be kind of surprised at this point that we'd actually get to that. But it's one of those bridges I'll have to cross when we come to it, because sometimes these decisions have all kinds of nuances and you have to really kind of delve down into it before you can give somebody good advice on what to do.
Thanks, Doug. And actually joining us also is Roxanne Warner, who's Public Affairs Director for Dr. Trautman's office. Did you have anything to add on that, Roxanne?
Not on that question, no.
Okay. Related to that, Doug, so I want to make sure everybody kind of understands, and by the way, this recording as well as the slides everyone used will be posted on the Harris County Democratic Lawyer Facebook site. That's where I would also encourage everyone for additional information as well as a website, both to join as well as get information. But if you apply for a ballot, and I want to make sure we're clear on this, Doug, you under disability or whatever provisions of the law that apply to you or you believe apply to you, and you get the ballot, there's a decision later. What are you supposed to do with that ballot if you're concerned that you may or may not fall under one of those exemptions you've applied for? What's the course that at this point, if you're able to share with us, you can tell us?
I mean, basically, you're allowed to cast your ballot according to your best judgment. There is a criminal penalty if you knowingly supply false information on an application or a ballot. So if you know that you're not qualified under the law to claim the disability exemption or eligibility, and you cast the ballot anyway, you could potentially have violated that law. At this point in time, I think everybody in good faith could make the assertion that they're eligible under the interpretation I have given you. And also, the county attorney's office has issued statements that say that anybody who thinks they might injure their health by appearing in person is eligible. That would constitute a defense under the law. You wouldn't actually have been knowingly or intentionally supplying any false information. That would be an honest assertion of the eligibility under that situation.
Doug, you've done a great job of anticipating the next question, which was what about County Attorney Vince Ryan's statement regarding disability? And that's publicly available, I'm assuming, on the county attorney's website about whether or not they, what disability means and what a good faith reliance upon that would be?
Yes, that statement is posted on the Harris County Attorney's website.
Okay. And this one I think really is going to be for you, Roxanne. There's a question of specific, will the school board and municipal elections be scheduled on the same date, November 3, as the general election, if you know?
Yes, I would say most of them have. It is up to those individual entities, but that's a great point that some of the elections that would have been on May 2nd have been moved back to November. And it is one thing to consider too when you think about voting early or voting by mail, because we, as a reminder, don't have straight ticket voting. And so when you add on additional items to a ballot, the ballots for Harris County voters will probably be pretty long because they'll have those things that would have been in May on them in November.
Roxanne, there's another one kind of directed, I think, that you'll be able to help us with. Dr. Trautman's already spoken about the steps already taken so far to protect folks at the polls, election workers in particular. And there's a question from Philip Kingston about whether or not election workers will have access to testing after the July runoff in particular, if that's been determined or made available yet.
That's a really great question. To my knowledge, we haven't had any kind of discussions, or we don't have a full plan or anything about testing post-election, but that's certainly something that we can work with the Harris County Public Health Office on and see what that might look like.
Great, and I'll ask Roxanne as well as Doug. We'll put with their permission, their emails up for further questions that if they can help you, they will obviously, but we'll put that up on the chat function as well for follow-up on kind of what I would call the mechanics of the voting process. We have a question from Bruce Rothstein, which I think has been answered about the process of doing voting by mail, the signature comparison, and I think we already have answered that one.
I do want to say too, Dr. Trautman mentioned that additional money that we got from Commissioner's Court, and part of those funds are to help us with additional staffing that might potentially be needed should we have a larger than normal amount of mail-in ballots.
Great. The next one I noted is from Audrey Evans asking about the information, and I've sent that out. It's in the chat function for Nicole Peterson, who's coordinating that in Harris County. That's at votepro@harrisdemocrats.com. That's the recruiting of election judges as well as folks to assist in protecting our vote in November. Let's see. Doug, there's a question. Is there a potential claim by the Attorney General against individual voters that a request for mail ballot was voter fraud because it ignored his advice? Is that, I think the question, as I understand it, is statements that have been made by our Attorney General of the state of Texas intended to have any purpose that you can determine to guide voters, or what's the whole purpose of the Attorney General statements if you're able to make that determination?
The trouble with the Attorney General's press releases and statements are that we're not sure that what the authorization under the law that he has to actually make any kind of definitive statement. Obviously, the Attorney General has the power to prosecute voter fraud if he wants, and he can take the position that people are intentionally violating the law if they claim the eligibility under the disability eligibility without actually being, according to him, disabled. But I think there's a really good faith argument that the disability exception under 82.002 doesn't mean what he says it means. It means it means what I said it meant. And I think that anybody in good faith could say, well, I, looking at this, in good faith believe I am really eligible, and I am not intentionally misrepresenting anything by claiming this eligibility and asking for a mail-in ballot. And, to tell you the truth, he can rely, any voter can rely on that written statement that our office has issued. And I'll tell you, I'll volunteer to come to anybody's trial if they're being prosecuted for election fraud on this basis and testify that they had a real good faith belief that what they were doing was perfectly legal.
How about we just play this video?
Yeah, there you go. And one of the scariest parts about that letter was that he threatened not only the voters that might claim it, but anybody such as myself that might advise a voter to claim that particular eligibility. So just by coming on this video and giving you a real clean video recording of me advising people to do it, according to the Attorney General, is the Commission of Voter Fraud. And I'm not the least bit afraid of any kind of prosecution like that, neither should anybody else.
Well, it kind of sounds like it's your job at the county attorney's office, I would expect.
It absolutely is.
And actually Roxanne has already answered it. If you do apply by mail, then there's a email as well as a direct number that's on the chat function for how you can check on the status. And likewise, Roxanne, I think this is one for you. Mechanically, if you determine later or there's some determination and you actually get a mail-in ballot, what are you supposed to do if you want to vote or if the circumstances change that you're actually able to vote in person? What's the process?
Yeah, so if you do have your mail-in ballot in hand and you decide that you want to vote in person, bring that ballot with you when you go vote, and you will still be able to vote in person. I think Doug might want to elaborate on that answer, though. I think there's a little bit more technical to it as well.
Yeah, basically, this is a question that actually comes up in my business all the time. Essentially, if you have a mail-in ballot, the election workers on election day or early voting will have that on their list that you've requested a mail-in ballot. If you bring that mail-in ballot with you, you can hand it to the election worker and they can cancel the mail-in ballot and allow you to vote a regular ballot right there in person. If you show up and say, yeah, I got a mail-in ballot, I lost it, I'm worried about, not being able to vote, they will still allow you to cast a provisional ballot. And the early voting ballot board will then review the records to determine whether or not they've received the mail-in ballot. And if not, they'll count the provisional ballot.
So the process is if circumstances change, say you're in the county, weren't expected to be in the county, you can still vote in person. You'll sign a provisional ballot, and obviously, as long as you haven't also voted by mail, you're allowed to vote in person. Am I saying that correct, Doug?
Yes, and if we've received your mail-in ballot, we'll count that ballot instead. Nobody will be disenfranchised completely. And of course, if you actually physically still have the mail-in ballot in your hand, you can turn that in and they'll cancel it, and you can vote in person non-provisionally. You can just vote a regular ballot.
Got it. Rose, I think this may be up in your area. Is there going to be a list of voters available who've registered by mail or asked rather for a ballot by mail that folks can actually access at some point before the ballot is held?
So the question is, can people track whether their application was received and if their ballot is on the way?
No, slightly different. There's a number of the county, and maybe it isn't something, but the question is, are there going to be public records that indicate who's applied for a ballot by mail?
That is not a public record until after the election. Then we can see who has actually cast a ballot by mail, just as we can see who voted in person, but they're not publicly available records, which is, but folks, if they need to know the status of their application or whether they're going to be getting a mail ballot, they should call their county elections office is the only way to tell that right now.
Thank you. There's also a question about kind of the mechanics of CLE registration. We have a record of both registrants as well as attendees. And if you've already registered and you logged on, we'll do a comparison. And those folks who've registered and have logged on will be submitting on their behalf to the state bar for CLE. If for some reason you didn't register under your name, which people are allowed to do, please go ahead and send an email to president at HCDLA confirming and verifying that you've attended the CLE online. Okay, there's a question from Nancy Friedman. Will the party, either the state or Harris County, be sending voters 65 over applications for voting by mail as they have in the past? And I don't know whether anybody here is able, actually, maybe Rose, is that something you'd assist on?
Yeah. We are exploring all of our options to ensure that everyone has access to the ballot box, including proactive outreach of that nature. I can't necessarily tell you when or if we're going to send applications to folks who are 65 or over, but we will have an application request form up on our website very soon for folks who want to get an application, where we will mail them on demand, and then proactive outreach is being considered for sure.
So as I understand what you're saying, there's going to be something where you can request it online or by phone, and the party will go ahead and mail you the ballot, or I mean the application rather?
Exactly. If folks are they don't have a printer and need to have that paper mailed to them, we will have something up on mytexasvotes.com within the next couple of weeks where you'll be able to do that.
Thank you. And this is for any three of you that knows the answer. There's a question about, there's obviously a quote official county form downloadable or request. State rep has also sent out a form. Is there any particular form of ballot by mail request that needs to be used?
Well, yeah, I think I reviewed that during my presentation. You can come up with your own ballot form, but it has to have your name, your registration address, and it has to assert the reason why you're eligible. So if you can just type up your own letter, that it says, my name is so-and-so, I live at this registered address, I am a 65 or older. As long as it has your original signature on it, you can send that in and that'll be effective. There are lots of groups that prepare these forms. A lot of people send in forms that are not the official form. And as long as they contain all the information required by the statute, they'll be effective. My understanding is the county clerk's office also has a phone number you can call and request over the phone that we send you one of these ballot by mail forms. So you can either download it or call for the form, or you can come up with your own, or your organization can prepare its own as long as it contains all the information required by the statute.
So you can send in one by crayon, and as long as it has the required information, you're good to go.
Absolutely, but your crayon signature has to match the signature.
If you use a form, you know, so those, we do know that teams or elected officials do send the forms out. Our office typically works with them on that too. So those forms are valid. You can download a form off of harrisvotes.com as well. And either one of those is fine. And there is one you can download from the Secretary of State that's a bit different than ours, but that's okay too.
Yeah, lots of organizations have these forms you can download off their webpage.
Thanks. And so basically any form that has it, but obviously the preference is the form, and it sounds like there's many opportunities, whether by phone, mail, or calling into the office to get them to mail it to you. That probably, well, not probably, I would certainly recommend that rather than crayon, but that's certainly sounds like as long as you meet the blue requirements. Doug, there's a couple questions that I would kind of group in terms of kind of the legal proceedings going on. One of them is there anybody in Dallas County who kind of has your role within the county attorney's office that you can identify?
No, I think the head of the civil division, litigation civil division, and the district attorney's office is probably the person that's handling that role. My understanding is that the county commissioners court adopted a resolution supporting the use of mail-in ballots that anybody can request to use in the disability eligibility criteria. But I couldn't tell you the name of the person who would be in the district attorney's office that would cover that.
Thank you. Final, let's see, I think we have about two more. We've already talked about provisional votes. Then there's an indication from Catherine McGovern that the Democratic Party, where they're going to have a litigation team on standby. There obviously have been efforts, including Nicole Peterson is working with us to make sure that there's volunteer legal assistance on this issue as needed. Making sure people have an opportunity to vote is something that's central to our mission.
One other thing I wanted to share with everybody, if I could, I have on a regular basis handed out my phone number to everybody so that if they have any questions about voting procedure, or if they have any problems trying to vote, either early or on election day, that they just call me and let me know so that I can either try to help fix whatever the problem is or answer whatever their questions are. And I imagine there'll be a lot of questions on this particular point. So I'd like to give you that phone number now, if I could, so that everybody has that available to them, so they could call me if they have any such question.
Hang on, Doug, 1 minute. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat function very, very quickly. That way everybody will have it. But this number is, go ahead.
Okay, it's 281 935 1904.
1904, and that's the number for?
That's the number for Douglas P. Ray, Special Assistant County Attorney.
That's for additional information. Thank you, Doug.
That number's been handed out to every election judge for the last 10 years, and they make very reasonable use of it. And I expect everybody that has a problem to be able to use that as a resource to be able to help answer any questions they have about voting.
We have what looks like our last question, but I'm going to check to make sure we've answered them all. And obviously you have a few more seconds, I guess, to put it in or at least start. When you sign the application for voting by mail, do you use your legal name or the name under which you're registered? So I'm not sure. Does that make sense?
I would use the name that you're registered under so that we won't have any problem matching it to assure that you are the person who's offering to vote. And whatever you do, that signature should be the exact same signature that you put on the ballot by mail when you send it in. We're going to compare the request signature with the ballot signature to make sure that they're the same.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
I want to emphasize that too, is just making sure that those signatures do match on the application and on the actual ballot that's sent in.
There's actually a question about what if you're, and this is kind of a mechanical question as well, what if you feel that you're being strong-armed by an election worker, that your official ID is not sufficient and you require additional documentation of your identification? What's the process that you can describe for us for that? If there's an issue about identification, how is that supposed to be handled properly?
Well, the election judge is entitled to make a judgment about the sufficiency of your identification. If you run into a problem, you think that your identification is sufficient, and the judge is telling you that it's not, that is one of the prime questions that I get called about a lot, either by the judge or the voter, as to whether or not their identification is sufficient. You can call either me or the county attorney's office to try to get your best advice on how to proceed to make sure that you get to vote using whatever kind of identification that you're using.
Thank you, Doug. Before I turn it over to Rose and yourself and Roxanne for any closing thoughts, and by the way, thank you very much for keeping us almost exactly on time, which continues our record for our meetings virtually and online and in person, hopefully soon enough. I want to remind everybody, in addition to the May 21st event with Dr. Brendan Kelly, there's also going to be a Harris County Democratic Party Ramadan event tomorrow. Information for attending and participating is on the Harris County Democratic Party website. It's being led or coordinated by Judge Rabia Collier, as well as some other elected officials. Tomorrow, I believe at 2 o'clock, but that information is on that Harris County Democratic Party website. Rose, any kind of parting thoughts that you have for our many attendees?
Just so excited and enthused to see so many Democratic folks involved in this issue and engaged in it, and look forward to keeping you engaged in it and turning this into action also at our polls in the July and November elections. So thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, Rose. Doug, there actually have been a number of questions. I guess there was a recent transfer of proceedings from Austin to the 14th Court of Appeals. Anything you can share about that, or what's going on there that you're aware of?
I am not aware of anything having to do with that, if there has been a transfer. The closing thoughts that I have is that although this is the Democratic Lawyers Association and the Democratic Party is participating, our office and the county clerk's office do not view this as any kind of a partisan effort. We are interested in making sure that all voters, Democrat, Republican, or otherwise, can exercise their right to vote. And we're not approaching this in a partisan way whatsoever. My interpretation of the law is not motivated by any kind of partisan motivation. And I just want to make sure that the law is complied with and that all voters have a good opportunity to vote safely.
Thanks, Doug. There is actually one last question, which we do have time for. Apparently, I guess there's a Texas Civil Rights Project issue on signature mismatch arising in Fort Bend County. Do you have any information or knowledge about that you can share?
I really don't know anything about what's going on in Fort Bend County. There is a lawsuit in federal court that was brought challenging the basis of allowing untrained election workers the power to judge whether or not signatures match or not. They have no training in graphology or any kind of special certification to be able to judge whether somebody's signature is actually the same. And the allegation is that it's a violation of federal law in order to make those matches on that basis. I don't know what the status of that lawsuit is or the status of this controversy in Fort Bend County is, but that is the procedure that's prescribed by the law. Then we advise the county clerks and the early voting ballot board to follow.
Well, we actually got an update. Thank you, Susan Hayes, in our chat, that there was a docket equalization transfer of the case to the 14th Court of Appeals, and is asking the state, and the Court of Appeals right now is asking the state to file a response on Monday. So right now it's pending in the 14th Court of Appeals here in Houston. Roxanne, thank you again for being here. Anything else you want to add? And obviously, please pass on our thanks to Dr. Trautman for joining us and sharing what's going on here in Harris County and what she's working at.
Sure. Thank you to everyone for being here. And just to echo Dr. Trautman's sentiment, we're mostly remotely, but we're still working really hard, and we understand there's a lot of questions right now, but we're doing everything we can to continue to do our elections that are safe and accessible, and we'll just keep on working at that.
Thank you all, and there's no way to applaud, so I'll do it for everybody. Appreciate it very much. This video will be available later today at the Facebook site for the Harris County Democratic Lawyers, as well as the slides that were used. Like I said, we're anticipating another interesting opportunity to hear what's going on in June, and we'll keep you updated. And please, if you're not, get on our mailing list. Joining HCDLA is a pretty low entry point, and there's a lot of great opportunities to help the party and locally here as well as statewide. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll sign.